Hey, Vu.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Steve. How you doing?
Very well, thank you.
How are you, Michelle?
Excellent.
It's good. The 2 minutes before the great reveal is always a bit nerve-wracking. I'll just wait for Pete to come on. Come on down, Pete. It's going to remain mysterious. Well, no, he's gone. So mysterious, he's gone. Where are you, Vu? You in Brisbane?
I am in Melbourne at the moment.
Melbourne.
Yes, there's something called the Global Entrepreneur Congress. So I just did a lovely panel yesterday, and I've put my family down, so it's a bit of a working holiday.
Oh, excellent. That's nice. And what's the purpose?
I heard some outtakes from it, and I heard it was a really great. Yesterday was fantastic. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a global event. I never had attended before, but the team who've organised it have done a really good job. There's people from all over the world here, so it's really cool to see, and you get an insight into sort of innovation policy from other countries as well, which is super interesting. And again, it's really cool that they have it here in Australia. So, yeah, very cool to be invited along and come along and see what's happening.
So, and what's the actual purpose of it, Vu?
That's a really good question. I'm probably not the best person to answer, but my impression is that it's about this idea of that we've got so many different innovation ecosystems all over the world, and there's very few chances to cross-pollinate between them to understand what different people, different countries, even within Australia. I think about what we're doing up here in Queensland versus, say, where you are, Amanda, in Sydney versus down here in Melbourne, South Australia, etc. We have such a small community, yet it is quite widespread. And then if you then take that to a global scale, something like this is just very interesting. It's also an intersection of sort of policymakers as well, where they get to kind of see what each other are doing, which is super cool. Have I bought enough time for Pete yet?
Now, while we're waiting for Pete, I might just sort of kick things off. Problems. I just wanted to, first of all, thank everyone for joining us today. And before we begin, on behalf of all those present, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional custodians of this land. I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people here with us today. So for those of you I don't know, my name's Amanda Price. I'm the head of High Growth Ventures, which is KPMG's dedicated startup team. I'm very excited about today's session. It's our kickoff session for our new series, Things I Wish I Knew Before I Grew. And we were testing this concept for a while on LinkedIn, and we got such a good response from people around, and lots of emails around topics, especially around sort of, there's a lot around sales and revenue, international expansion, which we thought we'd use as sort of some of the themes for today. So I don't know if we're getting, can you see Vu, Michelle, or Pete?
Can't see Pete. I can see Vu and I can see you, but I can't see Pete.
Oh,
Likewise.
Now I can see you and I can't see Vu.
Oh, no part of team.
That's so funny. I can only see one at a time. Pete, are you there? I'm not sure you've got your microphones off. No, not sure. All right, we'll just kick off. I'm not quite sure what's going on with everything at the moment. But so today I am joined by three amazing people. So I have Michelle, Vu, and Pete, who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves if they can in a second. And also what I wanted to say is this is a very interactive session. So it is designed for the audience to sort of send questions through, put your hand up, whatever. But if you do put the questions on the chat, I keep an eye on it and I try and bring those into the conversation. So please send them through as you feel you want to. Michelle, I might just get you to introduce yourself first.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. And really kudos to you for leading out with sessions such as this. We can all learn so much from each other as founders. And so really excited to learn from Vu and also Pete and any of the questions that come through. Hi, everyone. I'm the founder of Fingerprint for Success. We are a technology that's data-led and AI-led. we're using I joke these days, we're using generative AI before it became a thing. People would say to me, generative AI is never going to be a thing, but I'm really, really excited about the phase and the era that we're in. So our technology helps individuals and teams to understand and to bring out the best in each other. And they use it all the way through on the journey from, hiring, and we're able to predict how an individual will work with the manager or the leader in the team, how they'll integrate into the team, how they'll thrive or not in the company culture. And we're also able to predict performance in various different roles. And we also launched in 2020 the world's first artificial intelligence coach. So my background is I was one of the earliest sort of professional coaches, and we've built on some of the coaching psychology, linguistic language models that I developed 20 years ago, evidence-based, and now we're able to fully autonomously coach people without humans in the loop. And so some of our users and teams use that to develop themselves and to achieve their work goals or even personal goals.
Excellent. And I'll just give you a plug too. We use Fingerprint for Success at High Growth Ventures and have been using it since the beginning, really, Michelle, haven't we?
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
so since we started 6 years ago, and I just say the way that we use it is all the team does their profiles and we go on and aggregate it, and it can show us how the team sits in terms of what are what motivations we have, how do we, and it helps us actually, I think it helps us to understand each other better and facilitate better conversations as well. So it's awesome. So if you're not using it, I'll get on it. Hey, Pete, how you doing?
Thanks. It's blocked out. Now I'm in.
Excellent. Vu, I might throw to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Vu. I'm one of the co-founders of Go1. I always tell people I've got the best job in the world because I started Go1 with my best mates from high school, and we still run it today. What Go1 is we are a aggregator of workplace training. So we're a B2B SaaS business, if we want to just use our sort of lingo. At the end of the day, what we do is we aggregate training from all over the world, from providers all over the world, put it into a single subscription and provide it back to businesses, almost every industry and vertical you can think of. So we've grown from a team of 4 to, I think, just under 1,000 people across 22 countries globally. Our center of gravity, our home, where we're headquartered, where we live, is in the great city of Logan, just south of Brisbane. We're very proudly a Logan-based company. Newspapers will like to tell you that we're from Brisbane, but I always point out we're from Logan. I really love doing what I get to do. With today's topic, I'm a sales-focused founder. I've always been on the growth side of the business, and it's something that I really love and really enjoy. I've got some firm beliefs around the role that founders play in sales, which I might share a little bit later. Amanda, Michelle, I've had the opportunity to go through a KPMG program, I think 6 years ago, where I did the Fingerprints for Success program, where I learned a lot more about myself, but also the people that I work with. And also at the same time, I think that was just post our Series A. So, Go1's up to sort of a Series DE sort of level now. So, we've known each other for a very long time. So it's really cool to be able to have this opportunity to come back and share a bit about what we've learned along the journey.
Yes, actually, one thing I wanted to ask is, now you're a status of a unicorn. What does it feel like when someone went, well, now you're, obviously you've sort of got valued over $1 billion and you become a unicorn. What is that like?
Honestly, it doesn't really mean much. And I mean that sincerely. And it's like, yeah, they all say that. But truly, our vision as a company is to reach 1 billion people globally. Like, if you ask any of our team members, that is our vision. Mission is to unlock positive potential through a love of learning. The vision is to reach 1 billion people. I actually spoke about this yesterday. The $1 billion valuation is something that people externally ascribe to you. It's not necessarily something you can internally achieve. And so I think about the idea of the things that we can control is, can we reach 1 billion people and change, help improve their lives globally? Whereas the rest, that'll ebb and flow. It's a byproduct of it. But I think it's a nice way to be able to say that people recognize that the work that we're doing has value, which is always nice, but it's not the goal, as I'm sure all of you guys would be able to tell me as well.
Excellent. And Pete, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry for delaying getting in. Yeah, nice to meet everybody. Great to be here with Vu and Michelle. Really interested in this topic. I've been a CRO for 20 odd years and worked globally in all parts of the world, taking PE and VC SaaS companies to market. And so, it's just really sort of cathartic to go through this process and relive some of the pain and scar tissue, but important to certainly share those experiences because obviously it's a much more competitive world. It's just so much harder now than it was, even 5 years ago. So Incrementum is really a growth consultancy that tries to address or prepare companies for some of those challenges that they're going to be taking on as they expand their businesses, either domestically or internationally.
Thank you. I might start with you actually, Pete, and you've touched on the current environment. We've seen over the last 18 months a very significant change in the market, moving from this growth at all costs mentality to a focus on efficient growth. And as we transition to the new world, there's been many stories written about the negative effect of the growth at all costs model on B2B software companies. We're now told and read everywhere that efficient growth is the best and only path forward. As someone who works across a range of VC, PE-backed companies, can you share what you're seeing with regards to startups now having to make this change and how that's impacting their sales, go-to-market strategies and models?
Yeah, sure. And I think important to touch on, as Amanda says, I kind of work for both PE and VC companies, and obviously various different kind of cultures and approaches. And I think a lot of VC companies have really struggled to get valuations on revenue, and are therefore need to be in a situation where even at 2x growth, you're on the naughty table these days. So companies that have got cash and good EBIT are really what PE companies look for. But really, that's a financial discipline that you should have anyway, I think, for any particular business. So what I've observed, if I take the VC side first, companies that are VC backed, the ones that have been doing well are really, first of all, building good runway and financial models so that they understand what their options are. That's really key for the investors as well, but more importantly for them to understand how much cash they have. And from that, it gives them gateways as to decide, who do you hire? At the moment, a lot of VCs I'm seeing really are spending time hiring engineers, because if they can get their product to be capable, they need less CS people, less salespeople talking about it. It just stacks up. So having that financial model and runway options will determine kind of what your runway is. And it's really the challenge of most founders today is understanding that runway and protecting what they have. The second thing from a once you've got that plan from a sales perspective and kind of go to market, if you have a really good understanding of what your ICP or ideal customer profile is, you're in a good position, and you need to back that that strategy. But clearly the customer is far more enabled and educated now, so you have to do a much better job, whether that's kind of digital sales channels or education, kind of soft selling as I would call it. But you need to have a really good understanding of your TAM and your ICP, and therefore drilling into kind of your pipeline management and ensuring you've got good sales forecasting and you're understanding your sales stages. The other thing is you really need to be able to be agile. So if you've got some good customers, having your customer success teams able to upsell those customers, it's important for them to have those kind of skill sets. Being flexible on pricing, particularly if you're selling a high enterprise solution, customers won't commit out of the gates unless you're prepared to go through a pilot, which slows your sales, slows your path to revenue, slows everything down. But you've got to get going and get better. And you've got to be really flexible now with the market. I think the other thing is really understanding who your competition is as well. We're all competing against Bard and ChatGPT for our existence every day, and you should take that mentality into the workplace of who are your competitors and how you're really differentiating, what your offering is. So I think, and then finally, once you've got through the funnel and you've got all these opportunities and you're getting all the nice nodding and yes, we like you, I think it's really getting to the scrutiny of who are you really addressing the problem of true business critical need. And if you're not in the top 3 projects for your customer, it's not going to happen in the next 12 to 15 months. So you've got to be really brutally honest. And I think that the best companies do that across their business. So particularly if you've got a large enterprise sales, you're really determining the job and the work of everybody else in the business. So everyone should have a hand in, are we going to take this customer on? Because it's going to dictate our lives for the next 2 years in terms of going down that journey. So I think there's sort of a few things in there, Amanda, but I think as a lot of these companies that have traditionally been looking for valuations have gone back to sort of PE investments, it's brought back the core fundamentals again.
Yeah. Are you seeing, with VCs, we're seeing them obviously doing much more sort of extensive due diligence than they've done before. And we're also seeing some sort of milestone-based investment in terms of, we've got companies that want to raise their 10 and the investors giving them 2 and they hit milestones and it'll keep going from there. But to do that to take on that sort of, that type of investment, you really need to understand your forecasting, have the right systems in place around, and we've just done it, so it's probably really top of mind too, to have something like HubSpot, which is tracking the data and gives you that granularity of data and that allows you to really understand your sales cycle and all of that. Right. And you're seeing a real focus, because we've seen a big focus on the finance side of things, but I'm just wondering from your perspective, you're seeing companies now go in and go, I've got to get more, I've really got to understand my sales process and cycle better.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, understanding the flywheel is really important. I remember years ago, I was VP of sales for a software company, and we signed Uber on a very large contract, and the chairman nearly kicked me out of the board meeting because it was just so left field from our core client. And guess what? They paid us the money but never implemented the software. So I think understanding that flywheel again, which goes back to the ICP and your metrics, your sales cycle. How can you get the sales cycle down? If it's customer success, what's your net dollar retention? What's your CAC? It's these kind of core fundamentals that you have to get insight on. And I think something as simple as the sales stages. If you're going from a meeting to a demo to a proposal, understanding where that's breaking down. Very often, most people don't really understand that. And what the COVID has forced us to do is kind of skip some of these steps, which is really problematic. And I think if the first part of that journey is too quick, the customer loses trust with you, and you fail to actually do a proper forensic due diligence of the need analysis. So actually slowing that sales cycle down in the early parts of the stages, so the customer's ready to understand and listen and talk to you, is really important. And then you can only control the pipeline, and a company who can put 4, 6, 8 quarters together is exceptional. I mean, very few do that, but once you get to that level and you understand you've got the pipeline to hit that consistency, that's really what both VC and PE are really scrutinizing in on now.
Yeah. And Vu, have you got any sort of comments just on how the sort of change in markets affected your business? Has it had any impact over the last sort of 18 months?
Sorry, guys, I just had a sorry, can you hear me? I just had a bit of a glitch.
Yeah.
Sorry, Amanda, can you just repeat that question again?
Yeah, I was just asking, in just the same sort of question, over the last 18 months with the shift in market conditions, how's that impacted? Has it had any impact on your business? If so, what is it?
For us, I mean, luck plays a very key role in a lot of the things that have, that we've had the opportunity to go through. Our timing has been really good. I think we're all impacted in terms of, the ability to get to customers, and if we see a downturn that may be occurring in the market, that may impact us. But from a VC side of things and from a capital raising point of view, I mean, we've raised a lot of capital in the years leading up to 2022, 2023. So we've been really lucky from that point of view. Mm-hmm. Just to what Pete's saying, we've always had a focus, even from day dot, even 6 or 7 years ago when we first met. We've always had a focus on the unit economics, which is what Pete was talking about just before, right? So the idea of CAC to LTV ratios, or what your sales cycles are, or what your win rates or conversion rates, or whatever, all of those different numbers that we look at, they're numbers that we looked at right from the beginning, because most B2B SaaS companies that I talk to, and I spoke to a few yesterday, I've said to them, I should be able to model your business with a mathematical equation and understand the sort of the levers that impact your business. And so the way I've viewed the way the world's changed, and in fact, I'll share with you, where valuations sit at the moment is still higher than when we raised our Series A. I feel old when I turn around and I go, well, you're still getting better numbers than what we were getting back in our day, right? Because I remember, Amanda and Michelle, when we first met, we had just raised our Series A, and I will tell you the multiples were nowhere near what they are today. for what a lot of B2B SaaS companies are getting. They're still getting good numbers compared to what GoOn was getting back in the day. But again, that's a bit of a retrospective perspective. But the thing I'll say to you is that the numbers that we always measured, even things like, let's say simple things like your CAC to LTV ratio, right? All this tells me is that this change in the market just means that the tolerances are different. The ratio that you may have looked at previously, in 2020 or 2021, let's use 2021, that number may be different today than it was in 2021. And so if you're a really good business, you should understand what numbers impact that, right? What impacts my CAC? What impacts my lifetime value of customer? And, Pete, you spoke about net revenue retention and a whole bunch of other factors as well. So for me, I look at it as going, if we know the unit economics in our business, then we should understand the levers we can pull to change those units, right? And as a result of that, we can then adjust to whatever the environment is, right? If we are looking, at a sort of a different CAC to LTV ratio today than it was 2 or 3 years ago, then great. What are the levers that impact us? So as an example, for us, we look at things like, okay, well, if we want to lower our CAC, what do we look at? Well, we've got to look at the efficiency of our lead generation, right? As an example, because that is one of the costs, the costs that come into play. So by that, you need to understand the cost, the cost per lead that comes through a channel, the conversion rate that sits on it, and the ACV that sits with each of those leads. I'm diving a bit more into each of the metrics, but what I will say to you is that it is one of those things where understanding your numbers and the levers that you pull to impact those numbers is very, very important.
Yeah. Michelle, any comment from you? Oh, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Great.
Yes.
I think for any SaaS business, understanding the metrics is absolutely crucial. It definitely is in our business, and being able to invest in the data. So I think it's one of the biggest challenges is all of the data tech stacks through the entire sales process, particularly for us being product led, is really crucial to be able to get the visibility to what Pete was kind of saying, being able to track the different stages and being able to identify, whether it be from the self-serve, the free to paid conversion, or whether it be through, sales expansion and working with the sales expansion team. And then exactly like Pete was saying, being able to track those different steps and stages is absolutely crucial. But going back to that first question, Amanda, about the, macroeconomic changes, for us, it's both a tailwind and a headwind. And so our technology, we sell into organisations through an individual user starts to use the product, and then they invite somebody else into the product, and then they build a team, and then another team in the organisation might start to use it, and then we go in and expand that. So we're going from the bottom up rather than a top-down sale. That being said, we still get opportunities through marketing qualified leads to get a top-down sale. And so the top-down sales for human resources in those spaces, there's a lot of restriction, contraction in those spaces, but because we're going in from the bottom up, we're actually we're a resource that is budget sensitive to the current economic constraints. So it's actually a great tailwind for us right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. Vu, you touched on it before around this sort of founder-led sales, and I've heard you speak a couple of times. It's a topic that you're very passionate about. It'd be great if you could explain founder-led sales and why you're passionate, why you believe so much that founders should lead sales. And also my last question on that is, which I was thinking this morning, how long do they lead it for? Is it forever?
Well, I mean, I'll start with the last bit. I'll tell you when founders stop being involved in sales. GoOn is, say, 8 or 9 years down the journey. So once I get to the stage where we stop leading sales and doing sales, I'll let you know, but we're not there yet, right? So I'll start off with that. But just going back to it, we started off the conversation today talking about, being more efficient. Pete spoke about capital efficiency and the need to be able to generate sales and grow your company more efficiently than ever before because of the cost of capital being different. And I think that's really important. And I often think to myself, there is no more efficient way to get a sale than sell yourself as a founder, right? Like sometimes, and Amanda, you've been there when I've run these founder-led sales workshops. I talk about the sort of the 4 components that make up an ideal salesperson. 1 is communication skills, 2 is sales skills, 3 is an understanding of the product, and 4 is an understanding of the customer or the industry that you're selling into. And I'll often ask people, if you could only choose two, which would you choose? And most founders will say communication skills and sales skills. And I say, yeah, I'll call bullshit on that. An understanding of your product and understanding of your customer are actually the two most important things. We can teach you the rest, right? And no one understands the product and the customer, theoretically, and that this should always be the case. No one understands the product and the customer better than the founder. That should always be the case. And so as a result of that, that's why 99 times out of 100, or even 999 times out of 1,000, founders will be the best salesperson, right? And I've seen that day in, day out. I see founders come to me and they go, I'm not a good salesperson. I can't sell. I'm not a slick talker. I'm not great at presenting. And I go, doesn't matter. Because if you're a customer, if you put yourself in a customer's shoes, do you want someone who's incredibly well presented and someone who knows how to sell? Or do you want someone who understands what they're selling to you and what you need and what they're trying to do for you very well? And often it's the latter, and often that is the founder who is best positioned to be able to do that. So from my perspective, the way I look at it is going, not only is it the most economical way, at least in the early stages, to be able to get great, to be able to get runs on the board and get sales, it's also often the most effective way. And most founders I talk to will say, I'm going to raise some money, hire a head of sales, and then hand over this baton and see you later. I don't have to deal with sales ever again. And I go, great. How about you give me 250 grand and I'll go burn it for you? I'll go torch it for you just for fun, right? Because, and this is what I'll come back to, is that with the changes in sort of the availability of capital today, and I think there's a lot of founders who are on this call, where you waste, and I'll be really blatant, where you waste the most money is in the early stages, because that's where the most exploration and experimentation occurs that is most expensive, right? The example I'll give you is if you raise $1 million at a $10 million valuation, again, just use some round numbers, and you waste $100,000 on the wrong hire, that's 1% of your business, 1% of equity you've just burnt, right? It's not $100,000 you just burnt, it's 1% of your equity you've just burnt. Now, Go One's at about a $3 billion valuation today, so that 1% that we wasted back then would be worth $30 million today. And I use that to just illustrate to people to understand that where you waste the most money is really early on. I can guarantee you'll waste it because you'll be least capital efficient early on because you're still trying to understand things. So as a result of that, you've got to think about what's the low-hanging fruit. It may not be sexy, it may not be something you enjoy doing as a founder, but it's kind of like this idea of eat your vegetables, go out there and sell as a founder, because it costs you close to nothing to go and do. And so that's kind of my ethos behind it. And yeah, when we stop selling is probably when we're no longer involved in the business as founders. Now, I've got a very specific view on this because, we're sales-led founders, but at the end of the day, it's something that's really important. If customers aren't buying from you, you don't really have a business.
Yeah. Michelle, how involved are you with sales? You're on mute again.
Sorry, I'm not a Teams user, so I'm not very good at Teams. I am very involved in sales, have been from the very get-go. I'm a sole founder, so I'm deeply involved in product and deeply involved in the sales process. And for me, it is super inspiring and really engaging, and it gives me a lot of energy because staying at the coalface of what our users' problems are and what our customers' problems are really just funnels back into the product constantly over and over and over again. And as soon as you get too far away from the problems that you're solving for, it becomes theoretical, it becomes abstract, you lose the pulse of really those crucial decisions. And in the era that we're in for capital efficiency, it means we need to kind of be more clear on some of the bets we want to place. And if you're not close enough to the problem, you start to just sort of lose your ship a little bit. And so I think it's just, no matter what stage you're at, if you're not talking to the users and figuring out what those problems are that you're solving for, or the enterprise that the solution's for, you just really miss out on opportunities.
Can I just add to that, Amanda, and Michelle, like that is such a good point that you make, Michelle. Like speed as startups that are trying to disrupt an incumbent of some sort or bring about a new market, speed is our weapon, right? Like speed is the thing that we have that a lot of our competitors don't have. because we're smaller, more nimble, more agile, however it is that you want to position it. So Michelle's point there, if I can just reinforce that, is that, you know, founder-led sales also increase your velocity overall as a business, you know, because you are getting that feedback and you're able to iterate much faster rather than go through a whole bunch of set of hands to be able to do that. So I just wanted to reinforce that that's such a great point, Michelle, because that idea of, you know, being able to move faster is our weapon. And, you know, I'd say to people, moving slower is the thing that will kill us, right? All the startups as innovative and high growth businesses.
Yeah. Pete, I'm super interested in your view on this. Are you a founder-led sales believer?
Yeah, 100%. I'm so glad, Vu, you said that. I mean, because there's a lot that aren't. And I don't know how you would do it, but I think that the challenge is, from my perspective, I set up, well, my example was I set up Critio's business, and I met the founder, JB Riddell, in France, and he just told me the story. And I learned the story. And I think that's the trick, is to learn the story from people like Vu and Michelle, or whoever set the business up, because, you know, Vu can't be everywhere around the world. So you have to figure out a way to scale it. And I think in the last business we did, we built up from scratch, and the story turned into the culture and the values. And so many people these days just get something out of a textbook or whatever and put it on the wall, and it's kind of useless. The culture and the values need to come out of the stories of the deals you did to get the company off the ground, and it's so authentic then, and that's how you teach the rest of the business to sell. So I think the ability to scale is the trick, because, you know, everyone just grabs the best sales engineer, and that's the best way to sell, or the founder, you know, because they can tell the story. And as Vu says, only they know the story. If you can learn the story and become as authentic, combined with being, you know, commercial, I think that's one thing. And the second thing is, you can set your companies up to scale that. You can set your companies up for success to do that. And a really simple way is, like, if you hire somebody, let's say you're going to hire a salesperson, stick them in renewals for 6 months, stick them in customer success for 6 months. They'll learn the product so much quicker. And then they're more informed to be able to become a salesperson. Now, you can't do that with everyone, but it's a good way to do that from a grad program, because you get people actually learning the business. Because, as Vu says, you know, salespeople can be expensive guns, and you've got to get those decisions really right. You do need those people, don't get me wrong, but it takes time to get those decisions right, and there's more risk. So I think it's like, the founder's got to be founder-led sell. You've got to find a way to scale the story, and then you know, and that becomes a real sort of flywheel effect.
Can I just add to Pete?
Yeah.
Sorry, Amanda. Can I just add to Pete's point there? And Pete, you make a really good point as well. And again, you know, living and breathing this regularly. If we hire, and I speak to the founders who are on this call, or sales leaders on this call, if we hire the wrong salesperson because, you know, it doesn't work out for whatever reason, but they were successful prior to joining your business. So prior to joining you, the reason why you hired them is because they were a great salesperson at company X before joining you, or a great sales leader at company Y before joining you. If they've failed in their role in your business, it's not because they're not any good, right? They've actually proven that they're actually pretty good. It's actually because you've brought them in at the wrong time, or you haven't given them the opportunities to learn. You haven't passed on that narrative, as Pete's talking about. But I think very often as founders, it's so easy to say we made the wrong hire and pin it on the people we hired, as opposed to owning it as founders and saying, actually, we made the mistake of hiring this person too soon, or in the wrong role, or didn't actually onboard them, train them, and upskill them well enough to be able to sell our product. Because if salespeople have been successful previously, you've got to think, why haven't they been able to be successful in our world? You know, if they come and join our business. And very often it comes down to the fact that, you know, we should be looking at what our responsibility is in that failure, and not necessarily that, oh, we just made a mistake hiring them. Because I get a lot of founders who I talk to about that, and they're onto their second or third sales hire or sales leader. And I always turn them and go, you think there's a pattern here? You think it might not be them, you think it might be you? And I mean that from a perspective of love, because what I'm trying to say to them is, what should we be doing better as founders, rather than just going, we need to find better people? Yeah, that's a real cop out. So I just thought I'd throw that into what Pete was saying as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Pete, I was going to say to you, I mean, we've all come across founders that don't want to sell. So just don't believe they don't want to do it. They don't think they're capable out of it. What do you do? What's the alternative? Do you make them, like in your business when you're in there advising, you're saying get out there, or are you going, okay, the alternative is if you're not going to do it, then what do you advise?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is just to outline the benefits of the founder-led sales approach and why it's important for them to pick up the mantle and do that. Because until the business can hire, let's say the business gets to a certain stage and the investors want to bring someone in, the founder is really the voice piece for that company. So they've got to be able to talk to the press. They've got to be able to talk to customers. They've got to be able to fix problems. So they've got to be able to communicate. Now, you might get a hugely or massively introverted engineer who doesn't necessarily want to do that, in which case that's fine, because they might be better off spending time coding or doing something else. But you do need to bring people in who have got those skill sets that can kind of complement that. And I think that's the other point, just picking on the back of what Vu was saying, like now, based on the economic conditions, nobody can really afford to hire lots of people, right? So A, you've got to keep your best people. And B, you've got to make sure people are multi-skilled, i.e. customer success can do upselling, which is a different skill set. Even though you don't think it is, to be cheeky and maintain trust is really a tough skill set, or a salesperson who's an engineer is the best salesperson you'll ever find because they're trained how to problem solve and they can be commercial. I mean, that is an absolute home run for a salesperson. So I think it's finding those kind of multiple skill sets in the people that you provide. But still, I think you have to explain to the founder that, in order to scale a business in this day and age, you have to be able to stand up in front of 1,000 people or clean the floor. You know what I mean? If you really want to compete with the best that are out there, as Vu as businesses capably proved, over the last sort of 7 or 8 years. So I think it's just advising them that you need that. But if you do need to bring skill set into the business, make sure you sort of bring in a couple of people in to sort of limit your risk if somebody, because there is a failure rate, like there is a failure rate in sales, which is 66% enterprise sales. There's a failure rate in a sales team. And it's, the GE model doesn't really change. So I think you have to focus in on making sure you limit your risk.
But Pete, also it's build that failure rate into your scaling plan, right? Like, I look at it going, in general, I look at it, and it's quite high, it's an overestimate, but I look at it as going 1/3 failure rate for AEs hiring, right? So if we hire a pot of 3 to 6 AEs, I'm looking at 1 to 2 of them actually not making it past probation at least, right? Like that should be built into your model.
Exactly right. Totally right. And that's a really good point, Vu. And I think that should be built into your budgeting for the next year. And many companies build the budget with a home run. It's like, so you're not going to have 3 people fail, you're not going to have 20% churn, and they don't build that into their model because you still got to carry the quota to the board. That doesn't change. They'll be like, what's the results this quarter? It doesn't change. Well, we lost 3 people. Well, that's not the budget you showed me, So I think taking time to have those models in place is really critical at the outset.
I wanted to underscore what Vu said earlier around the self-perception that I'm not a salesperson. If you're a founder, you had to pitch your idea to your co-founder, or you had to pitch it to an investor, or you had to pitch it to get your first customers. And I have my coaching cap on. My previous, 20 years plus has been coaching founders of all different sizes and scales of organizations, from many, many unicorns to people who've been struggling on the journey. And the one thing that I'd see is there is no stereotypical founder. You've got people who are exceptionally introverted, who are very, very thoughtful, very numerical, very numbers based, and that is still sales. You don't have to be extroverted. You don't have to be naturally what we classify as charismatic. The very thoughtful approach to solving the problem and your passion and care for it, and being able to articulate what the problem is that the customer or user is facing, and then being able to demonstrate how you've crafted your solution to it is all that is needed in the process. And then being able to expand that as an opportunity is another skill set. But that's something that Vu highlighted. You can learn that part. And so, I just think really challenging the stereotype of what it means to be a sales-led founder is most folk who come from a tech background actually aren't that way inclined. So that's more the norm than the classic idea that we have of a salesperson.
Yeah. Michelle, you mentioned before that your sort of go-to-market strategy is product-led sales or product growth. Do you want to just explain what that is? Like, what is it, and why has that been the choice for you?
Yeah, so we chose very intentionally this as our strategy. So product-led growth is one, a business model, it's two, a go-to-market strategy, and it's three, a sales motion. And thinking about it from those three different lenses helps you to tie it all together. And product-led growth in its most simplest terms means that your product does most of the selling. And so it means that you have some user acquisition channels. Usually in the early stages of a product-led growth journey, you're not paying to acquire users. You may pay to build out teams that create amazing channels for acquisition, from things like SEO and content to, building in virality into the product. But basically the product and some of the growth acquisition strategies bring users in without having to pay for them. They onboard into the product, and somewhere over the journey, they either take a free trial or they get the whole entire product for free, and there's variations in between all of that. And along the journey, they then go and experience value, idea as rapidly as possible for the use case that they came in for. And then along the journey, they hit some kind of a paywall and they are invited to self-serve to be able to upgrade. Most of the well-known companies that you all know of that use PLG is, like in Australia, is Atlassian, is Canva, is Vu. Their team used product-led growth early in their journey, I believe, Vu, if that's correct. I think you still do. And, safety culture, and then other companies like Slack, HubSpot to some degree. You've got Miro and so on. And so you all use those same products, you use the product for free, and then it helps you to upgrade. So then what we do is we identify those users who are, based on whatever criteria we're experimenting with at the time, we identify them as a really engaged user, and we get various different data that we're able to identify, and then we sort of tag them as what we call a product qualified lead versus a sales qualified lead versus a marketing qualified lead. So a marketing qualified lead hasn't made it into the product yet, but a product qualified lead has, and then there's nurturing that goes on for those. And then at some point, and we've only just recently done this, we haven't had any sales outside of myself in the business until January-ish this year. And we've just added in a couple of people into our team for sales expansion is how we think about it. They then reach out to the product qualified lead, and they take them on a journey to be able to find out what the biggest opportunity is in their organisation, to go and find champions across the business. Usually we've already got inside the organisation 4 or 5 teams who are using the product. And so then we can go in there, and then there are our internal sales advocates, either opening it up into more teams or taking us up to an enterprise solution, which is then working with the head of operations or the head of human resources in our case. And so the users are our advocates, they're our sales internal channels, and that's how product-led growth works. But because it's a business model as well, it means that you need to be aligned in how you build it all out. You need to have enough runway to do product-led growth. You need to be able to have alignment across your board and your shareholders, and also the team that you onboard into the business.
And so, in the spirit of the topic, what are some of the things you wish you knew before you implemented this?
Well, the first one is I had a naive assumption that because we all know about these great organisations that investors have a deep understanding of product-led growth. And what I've learned on our journey, in the capital raising journey, is that investors have a really great understanding, particularly in Australia, of SaaS. And they also have more experience, more exposure to top-down sales inside of SaaS. And so what that means is that's what they've seen the business models for. They understand the go-to-market for that, which is a very different go-to-market for bottom-up SaaS, which is known as product-led growth usually. And so it's been a really interesting journey. US VCs have a lot more exposure to it, so they know how to assess a startup at the early stages for that, and they know what the levers are. So back to Vu's point, really understanding what the levers are in a product-led growth business, and therefore how to pitch it. is really important. And in the very, very early stages, you're going to be proving and validating to yourself that product-led growth is your ideal business model, and go-to-market and sales motion. And you're going to be doing that through two crucial factors. One is, have you got enough organic user acquisition channels that are reliable, sustainable, and have growth in them? And how many of those have you validated? Because one of the most crucial drivers in PLG is your user acquisition channels. That is you will not be able to get the growth in the monetization if you don't have enough user growth coming in. So you need to have really high user growth. We have, between 200 to 300% user growth year on year. And then you need to be able to validate your strategy for the monetization from a free to paid part, but also that expansion part. And so you need to really satisfy yourself that you've got that solidly in place. And then you need to know how to pitch that, because if you're in an environment where investors don't understand it, you need to help do some of that educating. And I really wish I knew that earlier on. I could have accelerated that process because it was a naive assumption on my behalf.
Okay, and for as I understand, your solution-led sales, is that right? What's your?
I mean, so we run with we run with your typical sort of enterprise or sales-led motion, right? So with that, it's your typical sort of having your SDRs, your AEs, your SDRs generate leads, or your whatever your channels are that generate leads. Your AEs close the deals, pass it on to customer success managers. Customer success managers manage the customer and upsell. So it's a very typical sort of, sales model that you'd see in a SaaS company. I think just in terms of sort of, I can see a question there from Adam in terms of keen to hear more about scaling sales teams, in particular, moving from reliance on founder-led sales, and what are some of the key lessons. Conceptually, what I'll share with everyone is the idea that I have is, as founders, we start off carrying every single baton, right? We're carrying a whole bunch of batons, everything from janitor through to CFO, right? We're holding all these batons in our arms, and we are running around the track with all of them, right? And we want to hand off these batons over time, right? We can't hand them off at once. We just got to hand off the important ones first, or the ones that make sense to first. What I want to really reiterate with some of the things that I've spoken about today, it's not about doing all the sales. It's about ownership of the sales organization and ownership and the responsibility of and owning the performance of the sales org. So what I mean by that is that it's the ability to go, okay, well, I'm not going to hand over owning the performance of sales, but I can hand over some of the components of it. So starting points for me are things like, if you are sort of early on and you've got a handful of people on your team, even things like being able to hand over some of the early lead generation after proving it out yourself. So for us, we started off with an outbound. We used what they call a predictable revenue model. Aaron Ross from Salesforce, back in the day was CRO for Salesforce. We used the predictable revenue model. We found it in a book. I read the book. We said, all right, we're going to give that a go, right? And so we built a team of, I did cold calling and cold emailing initially. And then off the back of that, once I built out a model that was roughly good and could show it worked, and I think Amanda's just dropped off. So once I showed that could work, I was like, okay, now I'm going to hire someone to do exactly what I just did. And even if they're 50% efficient, that's still better than nothing. And then so I got them to sort of then replicate that. So I think as a founder early on, you've got to own the process and also the results and the outcome, but then bring people on board who can kind of be cogs in that machine. So I'm a fan of hiring sort of early, more generalist, or people who can kind of roll with the punches initially. And then Pete, I'm sure you'd be able to add to this. You then get to a position where you go, okay, I've been able to prove out the narrative and how we go out and engage with customers and the things that resonate with them. And then now we can actually go out and hire people who can take this and run with it. I've built a machine that's 60% efficient, and now I want to hand it over to someone to be able to give us that extra 30, 40% efficiency who's been there and done that. But they're not going to start from zero. If you hire someone who starts from zero, you're going to be wasting their talent and time. I always find that it's better to be able to have built a relatively efficient sales process to hand over to someone to scale, rather than rather than give it to someone and say, Pete, welcome on board, mate. I'm off. You can go and scale it for me. Good luck. Let me know how you go. I'll see you at the end of the quarter. So yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. And just picking up on that point, see Amanda's slowly joining back in. Welcome back, Amanda. Yeah, I think in terms of scaling, I think to Vu's point, you need to have some sort of a playbook, right? So that when somebody comes on board, there's there's hours spent on onboarding, induction, so on, and it's just left because the founder's busy, right? And everyone's busy. But if you don't invest in your salespeople to have that knowledge and to have an idea and a roadmap, it is difficult. But some things you can do is like a buddy system of pairing them with sales engineers or customer success. They just learn quicker. I also get a lot of the sales teams to jump into customer success calls each week, because you just learn so much more by the customer feedback. And even if they pick up 2 or 3 things that week, they'll take it into the conversations the following week. So it's incremental, growth and knowledge, in that capacity. And as and the more that, like I said before earlier on, the more that the founder can share the story, and people can understand that and learn from that, the more that's easy to scale. As you get really big, or a lot bigger, I should say, that there is programs we introduced a program called Death Surf, where if you've been with the company longer than 2 weeks, you could spend longer than a year, you could spend 2 weeks anywhere around the world. And so we got engineers from London going to San Francisco, and basically you got that knowledge sharing, you got the DNA knowledge sharing, and obviously it was a great retention exercise as well. So yeah, there's a few things you can do there to sort of scale.
Can I just add just a bit of a quick story that I see all the time is, Pete, I'm going to pretend you're the founder, right? Pete's then just hired his first salesperson, and he's put all his energy and effort into onboarding that first salesperson really, really well. He spent weeks or even months just getting them up to scratch, and they are now smashing it. And Pete's go, great, I've just hired this person. They've done really, really well. Now I'm going to go and hire 3 more, and I'm going to make this person that I hired before in charge of those 3. And what immediately happens, and I can almost predict this every time I see this, is that exceptional first salesperson you put all that love, energy, and effort into, their performance goes downhill. And those 3 next people that you hire have a terrible experience, and most of them fail. And I'm being very negative, but I'll share this with you as Dwight. And then I talk to a founder, they go, the first hire worked really, really well, but the next 3 went really, really poorly. And I said to them, did the next 3 have the same effort, energy, and love put into them that you put into that first one? And the answer is always no. And then the second thing I'd say to them is, and what happened to the performance of that first salesperson? They said, oh, it went to crap. And I said, not only did you shoot the first salesperson in the foot and impact their performance, you also gave the next 3 sales hires a really bad experience, because you made that person responsible. You outsourced that responsibility for onboarding to that first salesperson. And I see that really regularly, where kind of 1 + 3 = -6. So I just kind of want to throw that out there, in that, when you're scaling a salesperson, usually the first one isn't too bad, because you put so much energy into getting their onboarding right and getting them right. And I have to say, you have to put the same amount of energy into the next few as well. So I just want to throw that out there.
I might just throw one more question that's just come through. We've had early traction and PMF with global enterprise clients and have multi-year contracts, which we have done as founders, and we want to scale and apply this to SMB, B2B. How do we move from solution-based to product lead? We're about to raise to scale up our GTM here and offshore. Who wants to put their hand up for that one?
I'll have a go at it from a sales perspective. I would say it is very, very difficult to do both. And it's very hard, I would say, to go enterprise to product, unless you've got kind of 2 sort of separate business units. Obviously there's a different team and approach required to actually, address kind of enterprise sales in terms of the sales cycle and marketing investment. Whereas obviously, as Michelle's alluded to, is kind of a very different approach on the product side. So I would say it's impossible. I'm just saying, that would be almost like a reverse model in many respects.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'd say is understanding your ideal customer profile and whether and how that would change if you go to product led. So you'd be acquiring and trying to gain the attention of the end user versus who you've probably been selling to in the solution space. And so understanding them in a different way will be the most crucial element in being able to go product-led, because you'll be acquiring an individual, giving them an extraordinary user experience that they can get the value from immediately. And then you have a product journey that takes them on the next stage that then does the sale for you. So coming back to, again, really deeply understanding the end user's problems that you solve is going to be the most crucial part if you want to lean into and experiment with. It also takes an enormous amount of investment. And so being able to experiment and, put product solutions that you can test without having to build them, to be able to see whether or not that's going to meet the needs at that direct level, will be super important if you're also trying to be capital efficient at the moment.
And can I just add to that? And again, Michelle, you've made such a good point there. It's really important for us as founders, and I want to be really clear with this. There is a strong difference between experimentation and strategy, right? So if we write out a strategy for the next, 4 quarters or whatever it might be, the experimentation does not underpin that strategy. The data from previous experiments does, but we can't say, we're going to shift towards this strategy without actually having experimented with it and got data to show that. So I think that's really important. Very often I see people shift strategy where really what they should be doing is experimentation, right? To be able to get data to then inform future strategy. And then the other question I'd come back to is why? Like, why are we doing it? Why are we shifting from, strategy A to strategy B? Very often it's because strategy A is failing, right? And just be honest with yourself if strategy A is failing. Like, I get people going, oh, we're now going to focus on selling into the US instead of selling in Australia. And I go, well, why? Is it because you're slaying it in Australia and you've got so many sales coming out of your ears and now you want to increase your TAM? Or is it because you're actually not being able to sell enough into Australia and now you're having to sell globally because you've actually saturated Australia on $200,000 of ARR? So I come back to going, people try and usually, and this is a very high level, if you find yourself trying to reach for more TAM at the early stages, it's probably because your go-to-market strategy isn't working well enough. And it sounds very blunt for me to say that, but often when I see startups trying to change strategy, they're not being real with themselves to say their current strategy is not working. So I think you've really got to think about why you're looking to change strategy first. And it may sound very blunt for me to say that, but when I talk about wasting money early on, and I put my hand up as someone who has had that experience, it's because you mistake experimentation for strategy and you don't understand why you're changing strategy in the first place, which is incredibly important. And just be honest. If you go, look, our current strategy is not working, then say that and go, this is the reason why we are chasing a different TAM or a different market or a different strategy. Because very often I go, why not pick the low-hanging fruit? If your current approach is working, do more of it, particularly at the early stages, because you can do things that don't scale very early on. So yeah, so that's just me on my soapbox about that. But that's where we waste the most money.
Can I just add to that? Is that you're also always selling internally your team, and you're also selling all of your shareholders and investors all of the time. And so if you misframe something as experimentation versus strategy, experimentation has built into it that you're going to learn, and that you might learn that that's not the path that you want to go down. But as soon as you lock and load it and pitch it and launch it internally to your team and to your board or your shareholders as strategy, then that's a whole different ball game in how they're going to evaluate you and the trust that they have in you. So you're always selling internally.
François just elaborated. So clarify, we want to add, not to change, which is great. VC wants us to capture SMB. I mean, I would carve that out as an experiment and put budget towards it, but not have that. You right now it sounds like, and I'm just guessing here, that enterprise is your goose that's going to lay the golden egg, at least at the moment. So you don't want to sacrifice that at the need to experiment in a market that you're not sure of yet. So I would carve that out, and I probably shouldn't be giving this advice, but I'd carve it out and say that's an experiment. Let's test SMB, let's get some numbers back and work out whether or not this can scale and work well. But also just don't do it at the sacrifice of your core business is all I'm trying to say more so. Especially if it's working well for you.
Well, just conscious of time, I want to keep going. Just keep going. I had so many more questions all around international expansion. We didn't even get there, but it was great. So it's been fantastic, guys. I mean, maybe we'll just finish off just a last. So maybe just more broadly, just to share, if there is just one thing more generally you wish you knew before you grew, what would that be? Michelle, starting with you.
It would be just, it actually was what I wanted to say about that last question we were just talking about what I wish I knew was that you can really disagree with your VC. So if you know that your enterprise is the thing that's going to drive the growth, definitely explore, experiment, maybe, etc. But knowing what to stand for, and you as the founder, is a key thing to really trust yourself. And so that's based on data, based on progress to date, etc. So I think that's a really important distinction for all of us as founders.
Pete?
Yeah, I think I'm just glad I didn't know anything, to be honest. Otherwise, I wouldn't seriously, I wouldn't have done it, you know. And actually, you have to go through it to learn it. I think one of the things that I've taken away is being fundamentally ruthless and faster at making decisions. And I think as you go through this, you just get better at doing that.
Yeah. And Vu?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much reiterating what Pete's saying, but we're not moving fast enough. And I say we collectively, I say we as startups, I say we as if I was to go back in time at any stage in time and go one. I would just reiterate, if I was to talk to my past self, I'd just be saying you're going too slow. And I think that's really important. That urgency is something that we have to create internally as founders, and we can't lose that. And we should be really harsh on ourselves and go, we're just moving too slow.
Yeah. Good advice. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate taking the time to the call. It was awesome. I think I'm sure everyone got many, many lessons. I certainly have, and my team's on the call, unfortunately. I'm sure they're all going, yeah, that was another mistake she made. But anyway, there's many. But thanks very much for joining. And yes, and please, any in the audience too, if you've got any more topics that you want us to cover, just please send them through the chat or email me or LinkedIn me, because we're very keen to cover the topics that you want us to. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks,
Thank you all.
Vu, Michelle. Thanks,
Bye,
Pete.
everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
Bye.